Good afternoon everyone, welcome to our Magenta live panel discussion about BIM in the construction industry. For the next kind of 30 minutes to an hour we're going to run a few series of questions that we've gained from throughout the year from different customers and clients, and position these questions to our panel here, who I'm going to introduce you to in a second. So my name is James Smith, I'm the Solutions Manager at Magenta Solutions. So this afternoon we're going to look at kind of BIM, what's happened in 2016, and also where it's going to go in 2017, kind of focusing on 2020 drive. And there's a series of questions that we're going to discuss as the time goes on. So I'd like to introduce you to our panel. If you can introduce yourself, I'll start from the left-hand side.
Chris Needham from Metrocad.
I'm Robert Daniel from Magenta Solutions. I'm technical consultant at Magenta.
Simon Bevy from JS Wright & Co. Birmingham, the CAD manager.
My name's Dave Jennings. I'm here with two hats on. Firstly as Managing Director of BIM Object, and secondly as a board member for Building Smart UK.
Thank you. So I suppose to kick off, we should probably start by asking some of the obvious questions. I suppose the one that most people ask is, what does good BIM look like? So who would like to kick off?
I think it's good housekeeping initially, isn't it? To kind of enable a good BIM process. You need the information in there from suppliers, subcontractors, anybody from who's working within the environment all need to be on board and working for the same solution.
Yeah. All towards the same goal, effectively.
It's all orientated towards facilities management, isn't it? So to enable the company to control the object or the building after its life cycle is the most important part of BIM, and to enable that you have to have a very good housekeeping.
So basically starting at the end, and then
The whole structure of a BIM project has to be from the top to the bottom of the company, has to be involved and agree the rules set going forwards to make sure things work correctly. And if somebody jumps off of the bandwagon and tries to do their own thing and avoid the data that's been created from the BIM model at construction, that is then an additional cost. It's a divergence away from what you've agreed, the path you've agreed to take. All of the decisions about how you construct a project are made in the BIM model, not on site.
I think part of the problem in answering a question like this is, what do we actually mean by BIM? Because there's a lot of misunderstanding in the industry as to what BIM is, and BIM basically is a business process. And in very simple terms, it's a business process which enables people to have access to the information they need when they need it. So good BIM is, first of all, to me, an understanding of the process and actually buying into and being a part of that process, because without that you haven't got good BIM. In fact, without that you haven't got BIM.
I think it's important as well that approach has to be taken by everyone within the whole supply chain, and that also includes the client as well. So the client has to be there to be able to set out clear requirements at the beginning of the project so that the whole supply chain understands where they need to be to deliver the client's expectations on the project.
I mean, do you think the mandate has helped with this? Do you think, because 2016 has been apparently a big year from April the 4th, so do you think that, have you seen any changes in that industry? Do you think that's helped focus people, focus industries?
I'd like to make a comment on that, and that was, we had the deadline of April 2016, and there was a great level of fear, I think, in the industry approaching that. But April 2016 came and went with barely a murmur. Now, that could be classed as a good thing or a bad thing. A good thing in the sense that the industry actually bought into the ideas and the concepts that it had to be done, or a bad thing in the sense that people sort of wipe the brow and say, thank God that's over. But without doubt, the mandate has had an effect on the industry, because it started to change the way that certainly the key delivery tiers, the tier 1 contractors and the top ends of their supply chain, the consultants, the design houses, have been pushed down this route and are actually now, as a collective group, responding to that. So it's had a tremendous impact on the industry.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting how there's a lot of fuss before, a lot of noise, and when it came, it was almost kind of like, what happens next? I think there's obviously been talks about further deadlines and mandates that they're yet to release in different areas and roadmaps, so that'll be an interesting one.
Well, one of the things I've seen as well is that the central model is who actually administers the centralised model for the BIM project, because everybody's a stakeholder in that model, but it is a generalised model of everybody's data, whether it's you guys at BIM Object, or you guys as a construction company, or us as a survey company. It's everybody's got to have the input into that model, but it's who administers that model. Historically, it's been an architect, and they've held to that data, and then that's been part of their sale at the end of the day. But BIM moves us away from that business model, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's a very important point that you raised there, because this is a question I get asked a hell of a lot, and I have been over the last few years, because I've been involved in this process since 2011. And really, there is no single owner. You're quite right that traditionally it was the design houses, the architects who took control of the model. I like to think of it in a slightly different way. And have you seen track cycling, where you have those four riders going round and trying to get the top speed?
Yeah.
And after the first lap, the one at the front raises and goes to the back, and then another one takes over. I think in terms of management of the model, that is what theoretically happens, because at certain times the design input is particularly important, then the actual construction input is important, and eventually facility management is important. So I think that the management or the ownership of the model has to be collectively from everybody in the group, but the responsibility for managing that will change gradually during the course of a project.
I mean, I have a big background in PLM, and if you take that from a car industry sort of model, the owner of the model is the actual end client at the end of the day, because they act as policemen over at the end of the day. They're the end disciplinarian on the project. They say whether it goes or doesn't go, and my feeling is that's the way BIM should go, is that the model should be either run on behalf of the end client, or the end client should run it themselves.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the end user owns the model, because they're the ones who are paying for it all at the end of the day. I think it's more a case of managing the process. That's what changes. The ownership, I think, remains the same, or should remain the same.
But as I was saying, from experience with PLM, the automotive companies, particularly Jaguar across the road here, they're very hard on, they will control it, and they will have gateways that you have to step through, and that data has to be at a certain level as you go forwards in the project. Yeah.
And it's interesting with the automotive, because all the different tiers also interact with that model as well. So whether they are a supplier, so whether they supply the seating or they supply a specific part, do you think the construction of the BIM world will also get to that level? Because at the moment it's very top level, so you have your different disciplines and they're responsible for their specific area. So again, there's still duplication in some areas where they're actually having to then take all of those details and modules and put them into their own model.
It would make sense from a cost point of view. And when you look at the savings that the car industry have made over the last 25 years, they save money in multiples, not in percentages. The cost of bringing a new car model to life compared to what it was 25 years ago is a fraction.
And the quality's improved.
And the quality's improved incredibly. And the same should be true of the construction industry using BIM. To me, BIM is an exact replication of PLM, so it should just follow. It is a design process, and like you say, different people have different responsibilities as you go through the project, and that baton is handed on, and it doesn't hand on just point 1 to point 2. It's a gradual phasing in of the next person who's picking up the baton.
That all leads back to the first question, doesn't it, about good BIM? Ultimately, you can't have good BIM without the supply chain and everybody linking. It's all about collaboration. It's all about working together and integrating one into the other. So, kind of what you said, you all need to work at the same goal. The baton does get handed around. It is up to you to hold the integrity of that model, so that when the next company comes along, that they can pick it up, and the integrity is built within. It's not us working as a separate.
No,
It is a
sure.
full collaboration, which is ultimately what level 3 is all about in the future, isn't it? It's working collaboratively together.
I think the manufacturing aspect or angle is again an excellent case model or role model, because if we think about it, the manufacturing industry has been doing what we call BIM and they call integrated process. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
They've been doing it since the early 80s. The drivers that pushed them down that route were different. But yes, the manufacturers, automotive aerospace in particular, cracked this a couple of decades ago. I think the difference that we have to realise is that when we look at a manufacturer, they have a very controlled supply chain, whereas in the construction industry, we tend to be project focused, and the supply chain can change from project to project. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not here to make comment on that one, but if you do have this disparate supply chain where things are constantly changing, it's far more difficult to instigate the solutions, the integrated solutions that manufacturing have done. So until we start to think as an industry, this is an enterprise model, as in BIM, an enterprise process as opposed to a project-based process, we'll always have that difficulty. But manufacturers certainly have cracked it and are an excellent role model. If we look how they work, we can learn a hell of a lot from that.
Also, using the BIM ethos going forwards, you should identify what are the better products to use in the marketplace, and so I think you'll find the market will actually not implode, but it will contract into people will recognise that component X is much more reliable than component Y, and so why should we continue using component Y when it's the same job as when X does the same job and lasts as much longer?
And again, that's, I suppose, your return on investment, because you're actually being able to understand all of this information and you're asking for the correct amount of information.
Yeah. Again, the ROI question is the one that we try to use when we're pushing the benefits of BIM, but let's be realistic that you will only get return on investment from the BIM process if, and it's been mentioned already a few times, if the supply chain and the client, we mustn't forget the client, that's at the top end, but if the client and the supply chain are moving towards this sharing of data and directing of data, then we can start to see real return on investment. But if it's disjointed, it's going to be very difficult.
You have to.
So leading with regards to the objects within it is, I think once a client starts seeing the facilities management and back to your kind of X and Y, is that you'll start then to have specified items. So back to what you were saying about the manufacturers in the car industry, they work extremely well together because they have set companies or set objects that are provided to them. And the more and more that a facilities management and a client see that they're developing and, oh well, why are we spending 10 grand less on this building compared to this, it is because of such units or the fan calls or the heat recovery units that are in there, for example, are more expensive but they last longer. That's then when you start getting into projects where they'll start specifying, and that comes back to the manufacturing industry or the PLM industry, where we're starting to see a return on investment. They're seeing the return on investment. We're being specified that this is the product that you'll need to use going forward.
I've actually seen an analogy along similar lines of all things toilet seats within one of the big retailers, where over a 30-year lifespan of a store, over their estate for the country, they worked out that they would save £1.6 million by using the correct product, which was identified through BIM, because they were breaking that many toilet seats of numerous types, and if they came back to spending a little bit more initially and buying a slightly better quality one that didn't break, maybe broke once a year rather than once a month, it was £1.6 million on toilet seats.
It's right, the potential savings in the facility management or life cycle management of a building is far greater, by an exponential factor, is far greater than any savings during the design process. And actually getting that message and that detail moved into the facility management industry is the nirvana that we're looking for. And I think, to be fair, the government has recognised this. So level 2 BIM, which really is focusing primarily on the design and construct, as now linking with something called soft landings, which I'm sure you've come across, which is how do we actually get this information into the real environment. It's still not there, but that's one piece of the jigsaw.
I can't remember the figures that Paul Morell used to come out with back in 2010 when he was first driving it as a construction advisor to the government, but the figures were multiples again in the savings for facilities management, and they were doing. He was saying on the basis of the millions of buildings that the government's got around the country.
Yeah.
I think there is a saving, and a huge saving, and the biggest saving is to be had from the FM side. But there is savings to be had throughout the whole kind of supply chain. It's once you get into modelling, and once you're modelling properly and you're working in a BIM environment, you should start seeing a return on investment if you are a contractor or a consultant or an architect, because the information is readily available all of the time. And saves rework when you're out on site. I think you talked about Paul Morell there. I think the figures he was saying, it saves 75% of rework out on projects when using a BIM construction compared to an ordinary.
Well, I heard a figure, I think, one of the big construction companies up in Sheffield, I think, for the new bus station up there. I think in steel work alone, in clash detection using BIM, they saved something like £300,000 on one project.
I mean, it's funny, we were with a
just by creating the BIM model, correct?
Yeah, it was funny, we were with a contractor yesterday. We had their model, one of their live models in VR, and the design manager was there, and he didn't realise that the staircase would not work, so we went back and changed it there and then while we were in this meeting. And that's just, again, that's taken in that clashing, it's been able to realise something that actually you would have overlooked if it's just in a traditional workflow. So it's quite interesting.
That's right, and these are the things that BIM Level 2 is really looking to address, so to improve the efficiency and reduce the cost of the design and build cycle. But I mean, I don't know the exact figures, but there's lots of models which say that basically if you take a factor of 1 for the design process and it's a factor of 5 cost for the construction process, when you get into facility management it's a factor of 50 of that single. And with the outcomes of the facility management, in other words, the actual utilisation of the building, it's a factor of 500. So if we can get the design and construct process working to that level of efficiency and the right level of information transferred into facility life cycle, the potential savings are immense, almost uncalculable.
Yeah. Which then goes on to a lot of people see the value perhaps for the FM side, but how do you get the smaller practices, so the 2 or 3 man bands kind of wanting to work on these projects and then having to invest quite heavily?
On a very basic level, they should be way more efficient using a BIM 3D tool such as Revit than they would be ever using AutoCAD. AutoCAD at the end of the day is a drawing board. It's got some 3D functionality within it, but it's the use of Revit and the structures that Revit make you work to are the savings are incredible. I know of people where they won't. Well, they've gone away from AutoCAD and they never looked at a project again, anything other than Revit, because they can do so much more in Revit than they ever could in AutoCAD, and they could do it much faster.
Yeah. I think we have to be clear in the industry as well that BIM, and one of the things I know we'll come on to is this open protocol or closed protocol, and I will come on to that.
Yeah.
But if you have a process which allows input from any of the over 200 BIM-enabled technologies that are currently available in the UK, of which Revit is a major player, but they're only one of a massive pool.
Yeah.
It's how we utilise the speciality of each of those individual components. But you're absolutely right that if we have to look at these tools in a different way, to use the example of AutoCAD, and all that AutoCAD was an automated drawing. It was an automated drawing board. When we get into tools like Revit and ArchiCAD and Bentley Systems and Vectorworks and all of those out there, these are true building information modelling tools which add the data into the model, so we're into a different environment, and that's where the savings actually come. But we've got to learn how to leverage the benefits of all of these, because Revit may be a perfect tool for that application, but ArchiCAD may be a perfect tool for that one, Tekla may be a perfect tool for that one. And it's how do we actually maximise the benefit of these tools, which is important.
Yeah, and also leading on to that, how do you know, future-proofing it, making sure that you are using tools that are correct and you're using the right ones and being able to share the information correctly. In that particular area.
I think that's a little bit of a difficult subject, isn't it, really? I mean, to kind of future-proof what you're asking companies to provide. I mean, obviously BIM objects are a good example of a good website to go and get information from.
That's very kind, thank you.
But the issue then comes is internally, if you don't get that information or something similar to that information from BIM objects, but then somebody within your industry or your company then goes and changes it, then there is a problem with the integrity of that model. It isn't what it's supposed to be produced. It's not going to be what is out on the site.
Yeah.
So that's the difficulty. It's all about educating, I think. It's all about educating your workforce and upskilling everybody within the industry as to back to a good BIM process is that ultimately you're responsible for your element of a design. You ensure that that element is the right element of it and it's not a spurious model that's just created with funny angles or funny pipe sizes and that sort of stuff through it.
That's where it comes back to what I said initially. It's all about discipline from the company, from the top to the bottom. It's not just company discipline, it's project discipline as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I think we have to look at it holistically as well in that, and now we've opened the can of worms, and let's know the elephant in the room is all these disparate products. I mean, we're sat here in Coventry, there's a science park just down the road at Warwick University, and I'm sure that in that science park, the same as many around the country, there are students there banging away and creating perfect applications.
Yeah.
But if those applications can't communicate within the industry, then they just wither away. So we've got to encourage this open protocol to enable these things to work. And let me give you a really classic example, which those of us of a certain age can easily remember, and that was in the 1980s. There was a huge, well, late 1970s, there was a huge rush to dominate the video cassette recorder market. It eventually boiled down to two major players in the market. One was Betamax and one was VHS. And I see people nodding, so hopefully you understand what I mean now. Eventually VHS won that battle, and all of a sudden VHS became the only format for video cassette recorders, and that was early 80s. Now let me ask you a question. Between 1980 and 2005, when DVD took over, what advances were made in VHS technology? Apart from the fact that you could get boxes in different colours so it would match the furniture in the room, and you got double speed tapes, which the quality was so bad. There was nothing. There was no development because the industry squashed because there was one dominant player. Yeah. And if we ever have one dominant player in the technology, the same will happen and BIM will stop in its tracks. Yeah. We have to encourage the new ideas to come in and the new technologies to come in. And the only way we can make that work is to have these open communication protocols.
Yeah. Like the IFC, making sure that everyone can share.
Yeah, IFC is a good thing. I've got to say that because we're building smart hard, but the open protocol is exactly the same. Every other industry does it. I mean, people talk about IFC as a protocol, but let's think of some others. HTML, open protocol. JPEG, you know that you can open any photograph in the world with JPEG. Yeah. Where would we be without that? And that's all that IFC is a protocol which enables all of these technologies to communicate.
Because on projects as well, we see now people are becoming a bit closed in their BIM approaches. They're specifying that certain softwares, that's it, that's all they want back on each other, which is, like you said, limiting it, I think, limiting the opportunity.
Yeah. That, in a way, that goes back to the automotive model, though. Because different car companies have different specifications for software, and they have that because of their own internal management. They want it all in one particular format, and that's dictated by them as the main policeman at the end of the day.
Yes, but this is where manufacturing is different than construction, because in manufacturing, those organisations, the big car manufacturers, they are the client and the delivery all in one. Whereas in the construction industry, the client is devolved from the supply chain. This is why the government don't mandate specific tools. They mandate outcomes, which is quite right. You know, this is what we want. And it's down to you to provide the best solution. So the softwares that people choose are different dependent upon what's particular advantage to their businesses. And again, that's another drive for open protocols, because if you don't have that, we're stuffed.
It's very true in terms of the software. You might find somebody, for instance, like a construction engineering firm who might use a wide range of different applications. Their needs are different, so they have to use analysis software. So tools like Bentley and Runs tools are quite useful, but then they need open formats to exchange that information between different software platforms, such as Revit to do the technical drawing element. They may then also have an issue where they need to fabricate, so they need an additional application there that can export that information out so they can actually fabricate.
As I say, there's over 200 BIM tools in the UK. The chances that a major project is going to be able to do it with one is between nil and nil.
I think we need to get away from that thinking where we need to just focus on one. We do need to open that up and just focus on having an open exchange between the applications.
And that's a background maybe AutoCAD's to blame in that because it's dominated for so long. People have always used a single tool. Do you think that the government's targets are achievable that they've been setting out? So, I mean, from my perspective, from meeting with Kyle, I don't think necessarily people are at level 2 yet. There's still a lot of work for certain disciplines in particular to do and develop in. But do you think the mandate's achievable by companies?
It's a kind of difficult question again, isn't it? It all depends on the company and how much they ultimately, a government mandated project or a government mandate is only to work on a government project. A company like JS Writer, we do very, very little government projects, but we're starting to see a return on investment. We're starting to see that people are wanting to go down the BIM route. So is it achievable for people who want to work within it? Then yeah, I believe so, as long as they buy into it and they see the benefits of it. But it's down to individual companies. I think if you want to and you wish to pursue a specific area, such as working for the government or schools or the MOD, then yeah, it is very achievable. You buy into it and you all push as a company, and very similar to what you said to start with, it has to be brought in from the very top level of any company all the way down, cascade down, so the processes and procedures that you put in place are kept and maintained throughout everything.
Is it achievable? Yes. Will it be achieved? That's a different question. And I think the answer to that is also yes, it has to be achieved, because let's make no mistake, building information modelling or integrated process or whatever label we put on it is here to stay, because the benefits are very clear. So it's not a case of will it be achieved, it's how quickly it will be achieved. And that is dependent upon really how the industry responds and embraces this. There are numerous examples in history of companies who put their head in the sand and ignored technologies and they're no longer in business. I can give one very clear example. In one of my former lives in the mid-90s, I worked for a secondary silver refiner. They used to take in raw materials and produce sterling silver at the end of the day. Now, you may or may not know, but one of the richest sources of secondary silver is photographic waste. So colour film is about 3% silver, black and white is about 1.5% silver. And virtually all of their business focused on buying photographic waste, processing it and producing sterling silver. I was asked to go in and look at the industry and tell them about the future. I knew nothing about the industry, but very quickly found out that there was this thing coming along called digital photography. And they said, no, it will never happen. In 2002, they went out of business. So if people do not embrace this, in 5 years' time, they'll be looking for another job. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
If anybody wants a motivator, look to the future. If you don't do it, you're gone.
Do you think that's the client who should be motivating their team? Because we see a lot of clients and the disciplines as the lead architects who will pioneer it, or the contractor on a project, and sometimes the clients are just receiving models. We've had several recently. How do we actually get what we need from this model? We're getting sent these BIM models that we're being told we need. Who do you think should be driving that? Do you think it is the responsibility of the client? Are they not educated enough?
I think it's everybody.
That's it. Not educated. Are they not as well informed? is the correct way to say it.
Doesn't that depend upon the audience that you're speaking with? You might have somebody in their organisation, you should have somebody in their organisation that's technical and understands what they're looking at, but then again, you could well have the finance director off the board who's got no idea whatsoever, but it's his ultimate decision as to what goes forward. So he wants a visualisation, he wants a video, which is relatively easy to produce from a BIM model, and it's horses for courses at the end of the day. I've seen some graphics that have been done by some of the people we work with, and they've got things as daft as a bird flying off the top of a building, and people talk more about this bird flying off the top of this building than they did about any technical problems with the project, but the project was bought off, and it was as daft as that, but it's and things like leaves fluttering in the wind as you drive in and making things more and more realistic. You're almost giving people a movie, and that again is the same in the car industry. The big head guys who are not technical, they're not at all interested in the technical side of things. They just want to see it's what they're going to get, at the end of the day, and does it work for them? You show them a simple video, it works. But then again, you've got your engineers and the people who are going to maintain that going forward. They want to know the nitty gritty of what's there. And you can do all of that from most of the BIM tools.
The educated client is, you're opening up a can of worms there, James. I have to be very careful because I work with a lot of client bodies. I think the answer is that some clients have got it. There are examples, and I don't mind giving a couple of examples. Ministry of Justice, for example, as a government department, they've got it with there today, and they can see the benefits of it. Some of the big projects, things like the Thames Tideway Tunnel project and HS2, I know that they're looking very, very seriously to implement BIM because as an owner, they understand the benefits of this. If we go then further across the industry, we have to acknowledge there are different types of clients. There are those who maybe just want one building, one office for their headquarters. They're less inclined to BIM compared to something like an estates management client who've got multiple projects. But without doubt, unless the client is firstly educated sufficiently to understand what BIM is, and secondly to be able to come up with the criteria which will enable the constructors to have a very clear brief as to what they provide, then we have a problem. And that link between the client and the constructor and the design teams associated with that is absolutely critical, and it's an area that we have to address within the industry. The same as we have to address how do the bottom end of the supply chain feed the information up. If we don't address those, then we've got a disconnect, and we're all agreed this is an integrated process. You can't have an integrated process if the head doesn't respond and the bells don't respond.
Yeah, I agree. And we have a lot of kind of clients we come across, well, we do a lot of refurbs, we don't need to do it. So they're existing buildings, and that's slightly dangerous.
Again, it's
dangerous.
It is. I mean, I've got one client who his special event in life is barn conversions, and he does everything in Revit because his throughput of work is infinitely more using Revit. It's right first time when he delivers it to his clients out on site, and he's happy days, even on a small project like that. So even people building a one-off building, unless they're bamboozled by their architects maybe, as to it's extra cost for doing BIM. I think we've got to drive through that phase where BIM doesn't cost more, it costs less.
Well, one of the early case studies which was presented and shown the benefits of BIM was the refurbishment of Manchester Central Library. I'm going back now to about 2011, 2012. So does it apply to refurb? Yes, it does. But refurb could be rewiring a house or putting new fittings in a restaurant. Does BIM apply to that? Probably not. But where that disjoint is, you mentioned Paul Morrell earlier, and when Paul first spoke about this, I think it was in 2010, he said it would be for the government on projects of £5 million and upwards. And that very quickly changed to all projects, and then that very quickly was changed to where appropriate, but it should be targeted to all products. It will only apply to all products if the industry looks at this as an enterprise solution. So this is a solution to the business, not on a project by project basis. That's the biggest barrier to successful BIM, is the fact that we try to reinvent the wheel every time a new project comes along.
It's not got to be a tool, it's got to be the tool that everybody uses.
It's got to be the process that a company takes across the whole spectrum of its work.
And, I mean, we were talking before about your MEP work. We've laser scanned projects where people historically would have just done manual drawings and things, and you need correct data, and you've got to go forward to using. They want to use a 3D BIM process, very simple at the time, but it was you have to get the good data from the outset, whether it's refit, new project, whatever, and the correct survey tools are the only way of getting it going forwards.
Yeah, that leads on to, I suppose, how, especially in the MEP side, how important BIM objects are, and being able to have those manufacturer objects available.
I think they're very important. They're one of the biggest. Ultimately, you can't have a good BIM process, or you can't maintain a level 2 stature if you haven't got manufacturers, or you haven't got your supply chain or your subcontract chain all buying into the same object. Again, it comes back to the spurious objects that are occasionally created elsewhere. If any of those start getting into models, and you're failing on what is a good BIM process. They are extremely important. If they update their information is passed through to their supply chain. And it's also down to the consultants and the contractors to maintain and make sure that their BIM libraries are all up to date, everything is in the right order, the manufacturer's tools is right, and what you're using in the model is the right object that needs to be used. But yeah, I think they're extremely important to any sort of BIM process, right away from top to bottom, in any form, whether it comes to FM, whether it comes to the concept of it. They're extremely important.
I've heard of an example, I think this was in the States, but it was particularly where the marketplace was still quite small for getting people, contractors with BIM already used as their normal process. But they basically said, okay, you give us what your normal process is of how you will design something, but we will add so many percent upon your price against when you're bidding against people who are BIM enabled, for us to model your discipline to make it work correctly within the BIM model, the overall BIM model. And so they were putting their own cost on to actually create the correct model in the format they wanted it to sort of equalise the workplace. You were almost
pushing the cost down the supply chain, basically.
Yeah, and you also want to.
Well, no, you were saying you either work in BIM,
yeah,
or if you don't want to, your cost is less because they have got a cost to their deliverable has to be that BIM model, the correct BIM model. So why should they absorb that cost? The contractors might be bidding against somebody else who is BIM enabled. So why should they be allowed to get away without doing that work?
But that's all of our responsibility, isn't it, to ensure that everybody is on board with what we're trying to achieve with BIM. Ultimately, you don't really want to push them down the route of saying, well, if you can't do it, then somebody else will do it. It's trying to educate them that if you do this, look at the sort of investment, or look at the information that other people can get from you. You're ahead of the You're ahead of the kind of curve. You know?
Well, that's effectively what they would do. And they were, in actual fact, I think they were putting one of their own engineers in that supplier's office and doing the work in the office for them. They were charging them for that as if they would have to have somebody sat there doing it. But then they're seeing the benefits of it as you go forward, the technical benefits of it.
If that's the case, then ultimately they have a BIM library that's created by a subcontractor that's developing their own tool, so it is a massive benefit as long as people all buy into it together. If you've got one pulling one way and 10 pulling the other, then it's ultimately going to fail.
I have to comment on this one, but I have to be very careful how I comment on this one. So forget the company I work for, but let's look at what we're actually trying to answer here, and that is, if we take an object. Now, an object is only part of the design, so there are other things as well, but let's just focus on the objects, because at the end of the day, all constructions are basically an assembly of objects, the same as a car is, or whatever. So there are two things that we have to ensure with the object. First of all, the geometry, so that it looks in the right place. It doesn't have to look pretty, but at least it's something that fits in the right place. And That's not too difficult to create. But the important thing is the data that sits behind that object and how that data is controlled, because ultimately if we do not have the ability to control that data, then we're potentially creating problems rather than solving problems. And let me give you an example in the sense that if you have an object which is created and then downloaded into a model and not controllable, then basically what you have there is something that you cannot say is true. That's correct. So unless you have a single source of truth, so that object relates back to a single point where the data associated with the object is correct at all times, then you've potentially got a problem. So the minute you have a file-based object which you can copy, then you've lost control of that, and the model itself is compromised. So it's something that we have to be able to do, is to control this, and the phrase is single source of truth. But without that, we simply cannot successfully create a model that people can use and believe in.
Controlled document, isn't it, in a drawing office in the olden days?
Yeah.
That's where a good common data environment comes into effect, though, doesn't it? If you've got a common data environment in-house within a contractor that is able to maintain and update metadata,
Yes.
then you alleviate that issue, because all of your information is stored together. You have an environment where all of your revisions for every single object, so there is no copy of it, there is no outside source, there is just a relationship to an area.
Until that model goes from that environment into another environment where somebody's got to use it. And then, you know, unless you've got that control, then you do potentially have a problem. Yes, if you've got a common data environment within a business, that's critically important because it's a platform where you can share data. But that's what a common data environment is. What I'm talking about here, I think, is something slightly different, in the sense that if you're a contractor and you've got your own library, then yes, you can control that data. But the minute that model moves away from the contractor, unless you've got the ability to keep that information up to date, that's what I'm getting at. Whereas if you've got an object which is referenced back to a single source, and that could be at the contractor, it could be in the cloud, it could be wherever, but it's got to be something where there is only one source of truth, and that object is referred back to that source of truth. Now that's the easy way of doing it. And then as a contractor, or as an MEP engineer, or whoever's got the library, you have control of the library, but you also then have control of what everybody else sees, and you can add the revisions and notify them.
So the kind of biggest benefit you see is when level 3 comes on board, if we go for a full collaboration.
Yeah.
So it is controlled in one area rather than...
Yeah, it is. Level 3 will be, whatever level 3 becomes, and it's still under definition. Let's look at what we're looking at with level 3. If level 2 is to create an environment where we can produce model data, or we can produce data associated with the building in a central position, that's what level 2 is. So we've got this, and hopefully the single source of truth. Level 3 is when we start to use that data and share it with other people. So, okay, that building is going in the middle of that location. What are the road systems like? What are the security systems like? Do we need extra housing to house the people? Do we need more schools? Do we need hospital? It just goes on and on and on. Now we're in the position that if that model is not a source of truth, then it screws up the whole system. So whatever level 3 becomes, then yes, you're right, we've got to get that right. And logically, it can only be done in the cloud, because that removes the potential dangers of file-based.
Again, when it comes back to discipline, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you say, the cloud is the only place it can be. And,
at the moment,
and if somebody includes something on a BIM model that isn't accessible for everybody, it has to be, I would guess, there needs to be some way of noting within the system, this isn't a...
Absolutely. And you can only do that by notifying it, or keeping a record of whoever's got that model and is using it, and then saying, we've made a change, we're going to notify you. Or the preferable route is that the
model set is out of place for whole, I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of man hours can be just wiped out. Because somebody's put one slash in the wrong place. And as simple as that.
And in very, very simple terms, what BIM is doing is creating collapses.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why the standards are so important. That should be adhering to. So we've had a question in to Magenta, one of on our Twitter feed, and one of them's how does BIM affect interior design? Bit of a
Should be the same way. BIM
It's-
is
yeah,
a part of the construction process,
Yeah.
and it should be used the same way. Whether it's a refit again, the data can be provided for a refit, for a correct survey, or if it's a new build, you've got the data.
It allows clients to visually show people rather than kind of, I'm not too sure how the company do it, but if there's pictures, they can actually physically represent something within an interior through a model. So as long as they're modelling the same aspect as everybody else with the BIM model, then I think it's a benefit.
I'd refer the question back to the core fact that building information modelling is an ability to share data with people. So if you have information or data that you wish to share with people, then you are part of that building information modelling process. It doesn't have to be elaborate data, it doesn't have to be beautifully rendered finishes, but in the interior people need to know what is it that's going, where is it going, how is it going to be fixed, and how are we going to maintain it.
Yeah.
And these are all things that an interior fit-out company need to know, so that is the information they need to make available. That's all it is, it's sharing information.
Yeah.
So people have access to the information they need when they need it.
But from that, they can actually show almost exactly what the client is going to get at the end of the day.
That's a byproduct. That's a very advantageous
Which again goes back
rich.
to some of my clients which are using BIM when they do the videos, and daft or not, it gives everybody that confidence. It's giving everybody a confidence factor, isn't it?
What better way to sell your services than to show somebody the finished article?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
that's
that's
a more create your apartment before it's already
That's
built
it.
and decide
Yeah.
where everything is.
absolutely.
Which leads me on to we've got about 10 minutes left, but a couple of questions are, you've led on quite nicely to virtual reality. So that this year we've seen quite a big hike in the use of VR, and VR has been around now for 10 years. Plus, it kind of fell over when it first came out because people were getting motion sickness, and it was almost not solving a problem, it was just doing VR for VR's sake. But I think this year we've seen quite a lot of virtual reality actually being used constructively, solving some problems. Do you think that will continue? Do you see there's also augmented reality that's started coming in, so that mixed reality, bringing the two together?
Well, you know my answer because you've seen it. But yes, the VR is taking us to the next level, because there's one thing looking at a model and being able to visualise and walk through that model on a screen. There's a totally different level of information when you are within the model, because that's what VR is. You are actually now inside of that model.
Yeah.
And rather than make changes on the screen and look at them, if you want to move that chair from there to there, you can physically pick it up in virtual reality and place it somewhere else. That has to be an advance in terms of communication, and yes, VR and augmented reality is here to stay and will improve.
If we ever go there in the construction industry, there are simulation techniques now using data, using models we've created here, where you can actually simulate an operator doing a function, whether for repetitive strain injuries, for reach, for all sorts of things, and to analyse things before you ever commit to building something. Say, is it safe for someone to be doing this 100 times a day, and it's sort of a lessons learned again. Sorry to hark on about it, but going back to my old BLM background, industry, everything is checked. They have tools there, one that analyses reach, one that analyses repetitive strain, and it's done to the nth degree.
Yeah. You're right. We can fly aeroplanes in VR, for goodness sake. So I mean, this is not new technology. BIM is not the new technology.
No.
It's something that we're just adapting into what is a very traditional industry that works in a very traditional way. I think as the next generation come through, this will be a non-question.
Yeah.
I've got grandchildren who know a damn sight more about how to work in a virtual world than I do. You see these kids working in VR, and I mean, as they come up and go into the industry, this will become second nature.
We see my 7-year-old with Minecraft, building great big cities.
Redeveloping Birmingham too.
Yeah, it's amazing where we're going, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's been, especially this year, it felt that there's been a big push, and there's lots, especially the mixed reality, being able to work with the Internet of Things and sensors, and being able to see all these embedded sensors in their buildings and in rebars and things like that. That I think that's really where it's going. So you can walk around and you can pull up your energy. Technically, you get these. They get notifications when the light bulbs go out, but they couldn't tell you which one it is.
No.
So they're like, one light bulb's gone out, so it's absolutely useless because they still need to go around the whole of the facility in order to be able to find this light bulb.
You're into the world of pervasive communications now, and it's true that most of the manufactured items that we class as white goods in our houses, so the cookers, the washing machines and things like that, have all got the capability to produce this.
Yeah.
We just need a means of communicating, and you're verging on level 3 again here, James.
Oh, what was something interesting you there mentioning rebar is an inquiry we had a while back, was for somebody wanting to actually have evidence that the rebars were placed in the correct positions to the design that had been created in BIM, but they wanted to know that the rebar was there, so that when they poured the concrete, if ever there was a failure in 10, 20, 30 years time, they could say, well, we built it to the drawings, where can we go with that? I believe there are some new tools available for using the laser scanning for that within the Autodesk suite.
Yeah.
Direct check.
Yeah, laser scanning is a technology that's moved on in leaps and bounds in recent years.
Or you can laser scan everything down to about 17 microns now, and up to I think somebody's got one that'll do 10 kilometres. I don't think you can see that far.
Gone are the days where people were kind of manually marking up and drawing up their factories and their floor plans and things like that.
But the beauty is now, I mean, from our side, we can bring in multiple software or multiple methodologies for actually getting data about an existing building. We can use drones, we can use just conventional ground-based laser scanner, or we can use arm-based scanning to do, so if somebody needs to know where the bolt holes are compared to the front of the building, it can be done.
Yeah.
It's just finding the right tool to do that job, which is where we particularly pride ourselves.
And again, coming back to the collaboration, making sure it's all shareable and easily usable between all of the softwares, and making sure the correct tools are available.
We don't like to deliver point cloud data, we like to deliver CAD data in the format that the client wants it.
Yeah.
So it's easier for them, not about making their life difficult, we want to try and make life easy.
Okay. Well, I think that probably draws us to the end of our hour almost. I'd like to thank you for your thoughts on it. I think it's been interesting. It's good to kind of pick up on where we see the industry's going, and I think next year will probably, judging by this year, will be a pretty exciting year if it develops as quickly as it will do.
So.
Fingers crossed. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thanks a lot.